Hi everyone, I'm Emma.
I'm Jack.
Welcome to our channel. I need to confess something.
That sentence usually means something happened.
Why do you always say that?
Because every time you start a conversation with, I need to confess something, I know there's a story coming.
Maybe I just like making conversations more interesting.
Or maybe you keep making questionable decisions.
That's a little harsh.
Is it?
Maybe not.
Okay, what happened?
I almost canceled today's recording.
You did not.
I did.
Why?
Because this morning I woke up and thought, maybe we should do this tomorrow.
Emma,
I know.
we're recording an episode about procrastination.
Yes.
And you almost procrastinated recording the episode.
When you say it like that, it sounds bad.
Because it is bad.
I prefer to think of it as practical research.
Research.
Yes, I wanted to understand procrastination from a personal perspective.
So you became the experiment.
Exactly.
That's a very creative way to justify avoiding work.
You know what? That actually proves our point.
Which point?
People are very good at explaining their own procrastination.
That's true.
We don't usually say, I'm avoiding this because I'm uncomfortable.
No.
We say things like, I work better under pressure.
That's a classic one.
Or, I just need to organize my thoughts first.
Which sometimes means you haven't started.
Exactly.
Or, I'll do it when I have more energy.
That one is dangerous.
Why?
Because sometimes you wait for the perfect moment.
And the perfect moment never arrives.
Right.
You know what's funny?
What?
Everyone talks about procrastination like it's this strange habit that only happens to certain people.
But everyone does it.
Everyone.
Even people who seem incredibly organized.
Especially some of them.
Really?
Yes.
Why?
Because sometimes organized people are just better at hiding it.
That's interesting.
They have beautiful planners.
Okay.
Color-coded calendars.
Yes.
Fancy productivity apps.
I've downloaded so many of those.
And then,
I use them for about a week.
then,
I stop opening them.
exactly.
The funny thing is, when I download a new productivity app, I feel like my life is already improving.
Before doing anything.
Yes,
That's the dangerous part.
because planning feels like progress.
But planning isn't always progress.
Sometimes it's just a more comfortable form of avoiding.
I think that's something many people don't realize.
Yeah,
Procrastination doesn't always look like lying on the sofa doing nothing.
sometimes it looks very responsible.
You clean your kitchen.
You answer emails.
You organize your files.
You research something completely unrelated,
You convince yourself you're being productive.
even though the one thing that matters is still waiting.
Exactly.
I remember one time I had to prepare for an important meeting.
What happened?
I had 3 days to prepare.
That's enough time.
It was more than enough time.
So what did you do?
The first day, I told myself I needed to understand the topic better before making my notes.
Reasonable.
So I watched some videos.
Also reasonable.
Then I read some articles.
Still reasonable.
Then I started reading comments under those articles.
Less reasonable.
Then I somehow ended up reading an argument between two strangers about something completely unrelated.
How long?
40 minutes.
40 minutes.
Maybe an hour.
Emma.
I know
And what did you tell yourself afterward?
that I was doing research.
Of course.
Looking back, I think I wasn't actually trying to learn more.
What were you doing?
I was avoiding the moment where I had to actually create something.
That right there is the interesting part.
Why?
Because a lot of procrastination happens when we move from consuming to creating.
Explain.
Consuming is easy.
Like watching videos or reading.
Exactly.
Because there's no risk.
Right.
But creating something.
That means people can judge it. A finished piece of work can be criticized.
But an idea in your head is perfect.
Exactly.
Because nobody can say it's wrong.
Nobody can reject it.
Nobody can say it isn't good enough.
So keeping it inside your head feels safe.
But nothing happens.
That's the problem.
I think that's something a lot of creative people struggle with.
Definitely.
They have ideas.
but turning ideas into reality feels scary.
Because reality is imperfect.
Yes,
The moment you create something, it becomes something other people can see.
and that requires courage.
That's a good word.
I think procrastination is sometimes a way of protecting ourselves
Protecting ourselves from what?
from disappointment.
That's deeper than just being lazy.
Much deeper.
I think many people are actually very hard on themselves when they procrastinate.
They call themselves lazy.
They say, "What's wrong with me?"
Or why can't I just do simple things?
I've said that to myself before.
Me too.
Really?
Of course.
You don't seem like someone who procrastinates.
That's because you've only seen the finished version.
What do you mean?
Everyone looks organized from the outside.
But inside,
Inside, everyone has unfinished things.
that's actually comforting.
It should be.
Why?
Because it means procrastination isn't a personal failure.
It's part of being human.
Exactly.
But at the same time,
What?
we can't just use that as an excuse.
I agree.
There has to be a balance.
Yeah,
Understanding ourselves doesn't mean we stop trying.
it means we understand what we need to change.
That makes sense.
Actually, I think that's where most advice about procrastination gets it wrong.
How?
People usually say, just have more discipline.
Which sounds simple.
But it doesn't explain anything.
Right.
If someone keeps avoiding something, there is usually a reason.
Maybe they are overwhelmed.
Maybe they don't know where to start.
Maybe they're afraid.
Maybe the task feels meaningless.
Maybe they're exhausted.
Exactly.
So telling someone, just work harder isn't always helpful.
No,
Because you're only looking at the behavior.
not the reason behind it.
I like that.
I think before we try to fix procrastination, we need to understand it.
Like asking, why am I avoiding this?
Exactly.
Instead of asking, why am I so lazy?
Those are completely different questions.
And they create different feelings.
Yes,
The first question creates curiosity.
the second creates shame.
And shame usually doesn't make people more productive.
Usually, it does the opposite.
You know what I find interesting?
What?
People often procrastinate more on things that actually matter to them.
That's a really good observation.
Think about it.
Okay,
If something doesn't matter, you can just decide not to do it.
right.
You don't spend hours thinking about it.
You just move on.
But when something is important,
That's when things get complicated.
exactly,
Because suddenly, there are expectations.
you want to do well.
You want the result to be good.
You want people to think you did a good job.
And suddenly, a simple task becomes emotionally heavy.
That's the word.
Heavy,
A task can be small but feel heavy.
like sending an email.
Exactly.
Some emails take 2 minutes.
But you can spend 3 days avoiding them.
I've done that.
Really?
Of course.
You?
Yes,
I always thought you were the person who answered every message immediately.
I wish.
You seem very organized.
I am organized.
But
Being organized doesn't mean you never avoid things.
what do you avoid?
Difficult conversations,
Really?
especially when I know someone might be disappointed.
That's interesting.
For example, if I need to tell someone that a project isn't going well.
You hesitate,
I do.
even though the conversation might actually solve the problem.
Yes,
Why?
because the first feeling I have is discomfort,
Not logic.
not logic.
So your brain says, let's avoid this feeling.
Exactly.
And then tomorrow comes.
And the problem is still there.
Maybe bigger.
Usually bigger.
That's such a common human pattern.
It really is.
We avoid small discomfort and create bigger discomfort later.
That's probably one of the best descriptions of procrastination.
Because the choice feels good now.
But expensive later.
That's interesting.
It's like borrowing comfort from the future.
I like that.
You get a few minutes of relief.
But your future self has to deal with the consequences.
Exactly.
I think about my future self a lot.
Really?
Yeah,
What do you mean?
sometimes I make decisions that are nice for present Emma,
Okay.
but terrible for future Emma.
Give me an example.
Staying up late.
Classic.
At midnight, I think, I deserve to relax.
Fair.
So I watch one more episode.
And then,
2 hours later, future Emma wakes up at 7 in the morning and hates present Emma.
that's a very complicated relationship.
It is.
Do present Emma and future Emma communicate?
Apparently not.
Maybe they need a meeting.
Maybe.
With a calendar invitation.
And a productivity app.
Please don't download another one.
No promises. But honestly, I think technology has made procrastination harder.
I agree.
Not because technology is bad.
Right.
Technology is amazing.
It helps us do so many things,
But it also gives us endless distractions.
especially our phones.
Our phones are probably the most powerful procrastination tools ever created.
That's a strong statement.
Is it wrong?
No.
Think about it.
Okay.
20 years ago, if you wanted to avoid work,
You had fewer options.
maybe you cleaned your room.
Or watched television.
But now,
You have thousands of distractions in your pocket.
exactly.
Every few seconds, something can grab your attention.
A message,
A notification.
a new video,
A news update.
a social media post.
Something is always waiting.
And our brains love new things.
They do.
Why?
Because new information feels rewarding.
Even if it's not useful.
Exactly.
That's the strange part.
What?
Sometimes, I pick up my phone without even thinking.
Automatic behavior.
Yes,
You don't make a decision.
your hand just moves.
That's happened to me.
How often?
More than I want to admit.
Same.
Sometimes I unlock my phone and forget why.
That's such a weird feeling.
Then I open an app.
And suddenly, 20 minutes disappear.
Exactly.
Where did the time go?
Nobody knows.
Maybe our phones are secretly stealing it.
If they are, they're doing a good job.
Very professional.
Very efficient.
Unlike us when we have important work.
Fair point.
But I don't think the solution is simply throwing away our phones.
No.
Because that's not realistic.
Most people need their phones.
For work.
For communication.
For daily life.
The question is not, how do we remove technology?
It's, how do we use it better?
Exactly.
I've noticed something about myself.
What's that?
I don't usually check my phone when I'm happy and focused.
Interesting.
I check it when I'm uncomfortable.
That's a big difference.
If I'm writing and everything is going well, I don't think about my phone.
But when you get stuck,
That's when I suddenly need to check something.
anything,
Anything.
even something completely unnecessary.
Especially something unnecessary.
Why do you think that happens?
Maybe because my brain wants an escape.
I think you're right.
The phone isn't the real problem.
It's just the easiest escape available.
That explains a lot.
A lot of habits work that way,
We focus on the thing we do.
but we don't ask why we do it.
Like eating when we're stressed.
Or shopping when we're bored.
Or scrolling when we're anxious.
The behavior is often a response to something deeper.
That's a really important idea.
Yeah,
Because if you only fight the behavior,
you might not solve the real problem.
you might just replace it with another behavior.
Exactly.
So someone might stop checking their phone.
But start doing something else to avoid the task.
Like cleaning their entire apartment.
Or researching the best way to clean their apartment.
Or watching videos about cleaning.
Emma,
I'm just saying,
you're describing yourself again.
maybe a little. You know what else I think makes procrastination worse?
What?
The way we talk to ourselves.
That's a big one.
Because sometimes the hardest part isn't even the task.
It's the conversation happening in your head before you start.
Exactly.
What kind of conversation?
Things like,
That voice can be pretty harsh.
very harsh.
And the strange thing is, people think being hard on themselves will help.
Like they need to criticize themselves into action.
Right.
But does it work?
Usually not.
Why?
Because shame takes energy.
Meaning,
If you already feel bad about yourself, starting a difficult task becomes even harder.
so instead of having one problem,
You have two.
the task itself,
And the negative emotions around the task.
that makes sense.
Imagine you need to write an important report.
Okay,
You haven't started yet.
right.
Then you tell yourself, I'm so lazy, I always do this.
Now I feel worse.
Exactly.
And when you feel worse,
You want to escape more.
which creates more procrastination.
It's a cycle.
A really frustrating cycle.
It is.
I think many people know this feeling.
Probably.
You avoid something.
Then you feel guilty for avoiding it.
Then because you feel guilty,
You avoid it even more.
it's almost like the guilt becomes another reason to avoid.
Exactly.
So what should we do instead?
I think we need to talk to ourselves differently.
That sounds simple, but it's actually difficult.
It is.
Because we're used to judging ourselves.
Especially when we compare ourselves with other people.
That's another problem.
Comparison.
Yes,
How does that connect to procrastination?
I think sometimes we look at other people and think they're doing everything perfectly.
Meanwhile, we only see our own struggles.
Exactly.
We see someone else's finished product.
But we don't see their messy process.
That's a very important point.
Someone posts a successful project online,
And we think they are so disciplined,
but we don't know how many times they delayed starting,
or how many mistakes they made.
or how many bad drafts they created.
Right.
We compare our behind the scenes with someone else's highlight reel,
That's a common trap,
and it can make us feel like we're falling behind.
which creates more pressure.
And more pressure can create more avoidance.
The cycle continues.
I actually had a moment like this when I was learning something new.
What were you learning?
Photography.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I wanted to become better at taking pictures.
That sounds like something you'd enjoy.
I loved the idea of it.
But
I hated being a beginner.
that's relatable.
I would look at professional photographers online.
And compare your work,
Immediately.
even though they had years of experience.
Yes,
That's unfair to yourself.
I know that now.
What changed?
One day, I looked at some of my old photos.
And
They were terrible.
honest review.
Very honest.
But
I realized something.
what?
I had improved.
Because you practiced.
Because I allowed myself to be bad at something.
That's a powerful idea.
Being bad at something is part of becoming good at it.
But many people avoid starting because they don't want to be bad,
Exactly.
which means they stay at the same level.
Because they protect themselves from failure.
But they also protect themselves from growth.
That's the difficult trade-off.
I think this connects to why people delay important decisions too.
Like what?
Changing jobs,
Moving somewhere new.
ending a relationship,
Starting a business.
having a difficult conversation.
Those are big decisions.
Yes,
But sometimes people don't avoid them because they don't know what to do.
they avoid them because choosing means losing other possibilities.
That's interesting.
If you don't choose, every option stays open.
Even if you're unhappy.
Exactly.
So uncertainty feels safer than making the wrong choice.
Right.
But staying still is also a choice.
A lot of people forget that.
Doing nothing doesn't mean nothing happens.
Time still passes.
That's a little uncomfortable.
Sometimes uncomfortable thoughts are useful.
True. Can I ask you something?
Sure.
Do you think procrastination is always bad?
Good question.
Because we always talk about it like it's a problem.
I think there's a difference between intentional delay and avoidance.
Explain.
Sometimes waiting is useful.
Like taking time to think.
Exactly.
Or resting before making a decision.
Yes.
That's not really procrastination.
Right.
So the problem is not delay itself.
The problem is avoiding something we know we need to face.
That's a really important difference.
For example, if you need to make a big decision and you spend a week thinking about it.
That can be healthy.
But if you spend 6 months avoiding the decision because you're afraid.
That's different.
Exactly.
So maybe the question isn't.
Maybe it's
That's much better.
the reason matters.
I think one of the biggest misunderstandings about productivity is that people think productive people are people who never struggle.
They think successful people have unlimited motivation.
Or incredible discipline.
But most productive people still struggle.
They just have systems that help them.
Exactly.
They don't depend only on feeling motivated.
Because motivation changes.
Some days you're excited.
Some days you don't want to do anything.
The difference is what you do on those difficult days.
Right.
I like that idea.
Why?
Because it feels realistic.
How so?
A lot of advice Makes people feel like they need to become a completely different person.
Like waking up at 5 in the morning,
Reading 50 books a year.
never eating unhealthy food.
Never wasting time.
That's not realistic.
No one lives like that every day.
Exactly.
Maybe improvement is just making small, better choices more often.
I think that's much more sustainable.
You know what I've noticed about myself?
What?
I'm much better at giving advice to other people than following my own advice.
I think everyone is like that.
Really?
Yes.
Why?
Because when it's someone else's problem, you can see things more clearly.
But when it's your own problem,
Your emotions get involved.
that's true.
Imagine your friend tells you they've been avoiding an important task for a month.
I would probably say, just start.
Exactly.
I'd tell them not to overthink it.
But when it's you,
Suddenly, there are 100 reasons why today isn't the right day.
exactly.
That's so strange.
Human beings are very good at creating explanations.
Sometimes too good.
We can make almost any decision sound reasonable.
That is painfully accurate.
Think about it.
Okay,
Someone might say, I can't start this project because I don't have enough time.
sounds reasonable.
But then they spend 2 hours watching videos.
So maybe time wasn't the real issue.
Maybe.
Maybe the real issue was starting.
Right.
Or fear.
Or uncertainty.
Or simply not knowing the first step.
Exactly.
I think the first step is often the hardest because it forces us to face reality.
What do you mean?
Before you start something, everything is still possible.
Interesting.
The project could be amazing.
It could be terrible.
You don't know yet.
But once you start,
You get information.
and sometimes the information isn't what you hoped for.
So staying in the imagination feels safer.
Yes,
Because imagination has no mistakes.
but it also has no progress.
That's a difficult trade.
I actually think there's another reason people procrastinate.
What's that?
They underestimate how much time things take.
Oh, definitely.
People make plans based on the best version of themselves.
What does that mean?
They imagine future them as someone who is always energetic, focused, and organized.
Future me is amazing.
Exactly.
She wakes up early.
She exercises.
She finishes work before dinner.
She never checks her phone.
She cooks healthy meals.
She probably also has a perfectly clean apartment.
Of course.
But then tomorrow arrives.
And future me is nowhere to be found.
Exactly.
Instead, present me as tired and looking for snacks.
That's usually what happens.
Why do we do that?
Because we imagine future time as unlimited.
But it's not.
Right.
We think, I'll do it later.
Because later feels like it has more time.
But later becomes today.
And today becomes tomorrow.
And suddenly, the deadline is tomorrow morning.
Then you discover incredible abilities.
What abilities?
Working for 12 hours without stopping.
The deadline creates motivation.
Exactly.
But it's a stressful kind of motivation.
Very stressful.
I remember writing papers in college the night before they were due.
Most people have a story like that.
I would tell myself, I work better under pressure.
Do you?
Honestly,
Yeah,
no,
I knew it.
I didn't work better.
What happened?
I worked faster because I had no choice.
That's different.
Exactly.
Pressure can create urgency.
But urgency isn't the same as quality.
Right.
I think that's another thing people misunderstand.
What?
They confuse surviving with succeeding.
That's a good distinction.
Just because you can finish something at the last minute doesn't mean that was the best way.
Exactly.
Sometimes we celebrate the wrong thing.
Hell,
We say, look, I managed to do it.
but we ignore how much stress we created.
Yes,
The goal isn't just finishing.
it's finishing in a way that doesn't destroy your energy.
That's much harder.
But better, can we talk about something people don't mention enough?
Sure,
How procrastination affects confidence.
that's a big one.
I think people think procrastination only affects productivity.
But it affects how you see yourself.
Exactly.
Hell,
Because every time you avoid something important, you send yourself a message.
what kind of message?
Maybe.
That's powerful.
You make a promise to yourself.
Like,
I'll start tomorrow.
and then.
You don't.
So after a while,
You stop believing your own promises.
That's true,
And that can slowly damage confidence.
because confidence comes from evidence.
Explain.
You trust yourself because you've seen yourself do things,
Small things too.
especially small things.
Like keeping a promise.
Exactly.
So if I constantly break promises to myself,
You lose evidence that you can rely on yourself.
that makes sense.
That's why small actions matter,
Not because they solve everything.
but because they rebuild trust.
With yourself.
Exactly.
That actually reminds me of something.
What?
A few years ago, I had a really bad habit.
What habit?
I would make huge plans every Sunday night.
That sounds familiar.
I would write a list of everything I wanted to change.
Everything.
Everything.
That's dangerous.
I know now.
What was on the list?
Exercise every day.
Okay.
Read one book every week.
Ambitious.
Learn a new language.
Okay.
Cook every meal.
Emma.
I know.
Anything else?
Wake up at 5 a.m.
Of course.
and meditate for 30 minutes.
So basically, you plan to become a completely different person overnight.
Yes,
How long did it last?
2 days.
2.
Maybe 1.5.
What happened?
I created a plan that my real self couldn't follow.
That's actually a very important lesson.
I thought changing my life required a dramatic transformation.
But
It was really about small things I could repeat.
that's usually the case.
The funny thing is, I still love making ambitious plans.
You still do.
Yes,
After all these years.
yes,
Why?
because planning feels exciting.
And doing feels harder.
Exactly.
There it is again.
What?
The difference between imagining a better life and building one.
That one hurts a little.
Sometimes the truth does.
Fair enough. I think one thing we haven't talked about is how emotions affect our ability to start.
Yeah,
Because sometimes people think procrastination is just about time management.
but a lot of the time, it's emotional management.
That's a good way to put it.
Think about a task you keep avoiding.
Okay,
It might not actually be difficult,
right.
but it creates a feeling you don't like.
Maybe boredom.
Maybe fear.
Maybe frustration.
Maybe insecurity.
And then your brain says, let's do something else.
Exactly.
Something easier.
Something that gives you relief.
Even if the relief only lasts a few minutes.
Right.
I think that's why distractions are so powerful.
Because they solve an immediate emotional problem.
Not the actual problem.
Exactly.
If I'm stressed about a presentation,
Checking social media doesn't improve the presentation,
no.
but it does make me feel less stressed for a moment.
And that's enough for the brain.
In that moment, yes.
That's actually fascinating.
Why?
Because our brains are not always choosing what is best.
They're choosing what feels safest.
Or easiest.
Exactly.
That explains why people do things they know aren't helpful.
Like staying up too late.
Even though they know they'll be tired tomorrow.
Like eating something unhealthy when they're stressed.
Even though they know they'll regret it.
Like avoiding an important conversation.
Even though the conversation could solve the problem.
The short-term feeling wins.
Because the future feels far away.
That's one of the biggest challenges of being human.
We care about the future.
But we live in the present.
And the present is very convincing.
Very convincing.
You know what I find interesting about successful people?
What's that?
People often think they have stronger motivation.
But maybe they just handle discomfort better.
That's a different idea.
Think about someone who exercises regularly.
Okay,
People say they must love working out.
maybe.
But some days they probably don't want to go.
Of course.
The difference is they go anyway.
Because they don't negotiate with every feeling.
Exactly.
That's something I struggle with.
What?
I treat every feeling like a fact.
Explain.
If I feel tired, I think, I can't do this. If I feel nervous, I think, I shouldn't do this.
That's common.
But feelings are temporary.
Exactly.
Being tired doesn't always mean you can't work.
Being nervous doesn't always mean something is wrong.
It might just mean something matters.
That's a great distinction.
I think I used to wait until I felt ready.
And now,
Now I try to start before I feel ready.
has it worked?
Sometimes.
That's honest.
I still procrastinate,
Everyone does.
but maybe I recover faster.
That's probably more realistic.
Not becoming someone who never procrastinates
But becoming someone who notices it earlier.
and does something about it.
Exactly. Actually, I had a similar experience recently.
Really?
Yeah,
What happened?
I had to organize some documents.
That sounds simple.
It was
So why did you avoid it?
because it wasn't just organizing documents.
What was it?
It reminded me of a bigger decision I needed to make.
Uh,
Some of the documents were related to my career.
so opening the files meant thinking about your future.
Exactly.
The documents weren't the real problem.
No.
The feelings connected to them were.
Right.
What did you do?
I avoided it for 2 weeks.
2 weeks.
Yes,
You.
I know.
I'm surprised.
Why?
Because you always sound like you have everything figured out.
That's just because I talk slowly.
That's not how it works.
Maybe it should.
No.
Fine.
So what happened after 2 weeks?
I finally opened the folder.
And
It took 30 minutes.
only 30.
Only 30.
You spent 2 weeks avoiding 30 minutes.
Yes,
How did you feel afterward?
a little embarrassed.
Why?
Because I realized the task wasn't the problem.
The anticipation was.
Exactly.
That's such a common experience.
We often suffer more from imagining something than actually doing it.
The fear before the event.
Yes,
The conversation before the conversation.
the work before the work.
The decision before the decision.
Exactly.
I wonder why our imagination can be so negative.
Because our brains are designed to look for problems.
For survival.
Yes,
That makes sense.
thousands of years ago, noticing danger was useful.
You needed to think about what could go wrong.
Exactly.
But
Now we sometimes use the same system for everyday situations,
like sending an email
or giving a presentation.
or asking someone a question,
Our brain acts like we're facing a huge threat.
when actually,
We're just uncomfortable.
that's a big difference.
A very big difference.
Maybe that's why starting small works.
Because it tells your brain, this is safe.
You don't have to solve everything at once.
You just take one step.
Then another.
And eventually, the thing that felt impossible becomes normal.
I like that. Can I tell you something embarrassing?
Please do.
I once spent an entire afternoon avoiding a 5-minute phone call.
Only 5 minutes.
Yes,
What was the call about?
making a reservation.
A reservation.
Yes,
Why was that difficult?
I don't know.
You could have done it in 5 minutes.
I know.
So what did you do instead?
I cleaned my kitchen.
Okay.
I organized my fridge.
Okay.
I searched online for recipes.
Okay.
Then I watched a video about how to organize small kitchens.
Emma,
I know.
you created a whole productivity universe around avoiding one phone call.
That sounds ridiculous when you say it.
Because it is ridiculous.
But at the time, it felt completely reasonable.
That's the interesting part.
What?
Most procrastination feels reasonable while we're doing it.
That's true.
It's only afterward that we see it clearly.
When the pressure is gone.
Exactly.
So maybe one skill is learning to notice ourselves in the moment
Yes.
before we disappear into another activity.
Right.
Like asking.
Or,
That question alone might change a lot. I think there's another side of procrastination that people don't talk about enough.
what's that?
Sometimes we procrastinate because we don't actually know what we want.
That's interesting.
Not every delay comes from fear.
Sometimes it's confusion.
Exactly.
Give me an example.
Choosing a career.
That's a big one.
A lot of people say, I'm procrastinating because I can't make a decision.
But maybe the problem isn't procrastination.
Maybe they genuinely don't know what decision to make.
Right.
And forcing yourself to choose quickly doesn't always help.
Sometimes you need time to understand yourself.
That's different from avoiding.
Exactly.
I think people sometimes feel guilty for taking time to think.
They think they should already know,
Yes,
especially when they compare themselves with others.
someone else seems to have a clear plan,
They have a job,
a 5-year goal,
A perfect-looking life.
And you start thinking, why don't I know what I'm doing?
But you don't see their doubts,
Or their changes.
or the decisions they regret.
Everyone's path looks more certain from the outside.
That's very true.
I remember after university, I felt like everyone had their life figured out.
Did they?
No,
But it looked that way.
exactly.
What happened?
I had friends who immediately got jobs.
Okay.
Some people moved to new cities.
Right.
Some people started businesses.
And you?
I was still trying to figure out what I actually wanted.
How did you feel?
Honestly,
Yeah,
I felt behind.
that's a difficult feeling.
It was.
What changed?
I eventually realized I wasn't behind.
What were you doing?
I was learning.
That's different.
Yeah, I think I was comparing my uncertainty with someone else's decision.
That's a powerful observation.
Someone else's chapter 5 isn't supposed to look like my chapter 2.
Exactly.
But social media makes that comparison even harder.
Because everyone shows the result.
Not the process.
Right.
You see someone announcing a promotion.
But not the years they spent feeling lost.
You see someone traveling around the world.
But not the months they saved money and worried about leaving.
You see someone confident.
But not the moments they doubted themselves.
We compare our reality with someone else's edited version.
That's exhausting. Actually, this connects to perfectionism too.
How?
Perfectionism often comes from wanting certainty.
Meaning.
People want to know they are making the right choice before they act.
But that's impossible.
Exactly.
Because you only know after you try.
Right.
So waiting for certainty becomes another form of procrastination.
Yes.
That's interesting.
You don't start because you don't know if it will work.
But you can't know if it will work until you start.
Exactly.
It's a circle.
A very common one.
Do you think people can become less afraid of mistakes?
I think they can.
How?
By changing what mistakes mean.
Explain.
Some people think a mistake means, I failed.
Right.
Other people think, I learned something.
Same event.
Different interpretation.
That's true.
A person who believes mistakes are proof they're not good enough will avoid situations where mistakes are possible.
Which means they avoid trying.
Exactly.
But someone who sees mistakes as information is more willing to experiment.
And that's how improvement happens.
I think children are actually better at this.
Really?
Yes,
Why?
because children try things without worrying so much about looking stupid.
That's true.
A child learning to walk falls hundreds of times.
But they don't think, maybe walking isn't for me.
Exactly.
They just try again.
Somewhere along the way, adults become afraid of falling.
Because other people might see.
Or judge.
Or laugh.
So we protect ourselves.
But sometimes protection becomes limitation.
That's a good way to say it.
You know, one thing I've learned is that action creates clarity.
I like that.
People often think they need clarity before action.
But sometimes it's the opposite.
Exactly.
You learn by moving.
Not by thinking forever.
I have a friend who spent years deciding whether to change careers.
Years.
Yes,
What did they do?
they researched.
Okay.
They watched videos.
Okay.
They read articles.
Okay.
They asked everyone for advice.
And
They never actually tried anything.
that's a tough place to be.
Because information feels productive.
But information without action doesn't change much.
Exactly.
At some point, you need experience.
Even if the experience tells you something isn't right.
That's still valuable.
Because now you know.
Right.
Sometimes we think a wrong choice wastes time.
But staying stuck also uses time.
That's something people forget. Can I ask you something?
Sure.
Do you think some people actually need pressure to work?
Interesting question.
Because some people say, I only work well when there's a deadline.
I think there's some truth in that.
Really?
Yes.
I didn't expect you to say that.
Why?
Because you usually talk about planning.
I still believe planning helps.
But,
Deadlines create focus.
so pressure isn't always bad.
No.
The problem is when all your work depends on panic.
Exactly.
Because panic has a cost.
Stress.
Poor decisions.
Burnout.
Exhaustion.
Right.
So maybe the goal isn't removing pressure completely,
It's creating healthy pressure.
like setting smaller deadlines.
Exactly.
Instead of waiting for the final deadline.
You create your own earlier ones.
That makes sense.
The trick is making your future self's life easier.
Future self again.
Future self is always the person who suffers.
Future Emma would agree.
What would she say?
She would say, "Please stop making plans for me that I have to fix later."
She sounds tired.
She is. I think there's one more thing about procrastination that we should talk about.
What's that?
The difference between being tired and avoiding.
That's actually a really important difference.
Because sometimes people blame themselves when they actually need rest.
Yes,
They think, "I'm being lazy."
but maybe they're exhausted.
Exactly.
Modern life makes this confusing.
Why?
Because being busy has become something people are proud of.
That's true.
People say, "I'm so busy," almost like it's a personality.
Yeah,
And sometimes being busy becomes more important than actually feeling okay.
I think people confuse being busy with being productive.
They do.
But those are completely different things.
Very different.
You can be busy all day and still avoid the thing that matters most.
Exactly.
Like answering 20 emails instead of finishing the important project.
Or attending meetings instead of making progress.
Or organizing your schedule instead of actually using it.
That's a common trap.
So sometimes procrastination hides inside productivity.
That's a good way to put it.
It looks like work.
But it isn't always meaningful work.
I think that's why people feel exhausted at the end of the day.
Because they used energy without moving forward.
Exactly.
That feeling is frustrating.
Very.
You worked for 8 hours.
But you think, what did I actually accomplish?
And that can make you feel even worse.
Then the next day starts with more pressure.
And the cycle continues.
I actually went through a period like that.
Really?
Yeah.
What happened?
A few years ago, I was working on too many things at the same time.
Sounds familiar.
I had different projects, personal goals, and random ideas.
Random ideas.
A lot of random ideas.
I can imagine.
I always thought having more ideas was a good thing.
It can be.
But,
Too many unfinished ideas can become overwhelming.
exactly,
So what happened?
I would start something new whenever something became difficult.
That's interesting.
Because the new thing felt exciting.
And the difficult thing felt uncomfortable.
Right.
So your brain chose the easier emotion.
Yes,
Not necessarily the better choice.
exactly.
What did you learn?
That starting is not always the problem.
What is?
Continuing.
That's a great point.
The beginning of something is exciting.
New ideas are fun.
Everything feels possible.
But then reality appears.
The boring middle.
The part where progress requires patience.
Exactly.
And that's where many people quit.
Or look for something new.
A new project.
A new goal.
A new plan.
A new notebook.
Emma.
Okay, that one was personal.
Very personal.
Why do you think we love beginnings so much?
Because beginnings give us hope.
Hope.
Yes.
Explain.
When something is new, we imagine the best possible outcome.
We imagine success.
Exactly.
But the middle part is where we face reality.
And reality is less exciting.
Because progress is usually slow.
Very slow.
That's probably why people underestimate small improvements.
They expect dramatic change.
But most change is invisible at first.
Exactly.
Like exercising.
You don't see results after one day.
Learning a language.
You don't become fluent after 1 week.
Building a skill.
You don't become excellent overnight.
But people still expect instant results.
Because we're surrounded by instant things.
Instant messages.
Instant videos.
Instant information.
So waiting feels uncomfortable.
We want the reward now.
Exactly.
I think this is why patience has become such a difficult skill.
I agree.
Not because people are weaker.
But because the environment encourages impatience.
That's true.
Everything is designed to keep our attention.
To give us quick rewards.
Yes,
So doing something slow and difficult feels unusual.
it does.
Writing a book.
Learning an instrument.
Building a business.
improving your health.
All of these require delayed rewards.
And that's uncomfortable.
But valuable.
Exactly.
Can I ask you about something?
Sure.
How did you become better at dealing with procrastination?
Honestly,
Yes.
I'm still learning.
That's not the answer I expected.
Why?
Because people who give advice usually make it sound like they solved the problem.
I don't think anyone completely solves it.
Really?
I think people learn how to handle it better.
That's more realistic.
For me, the biggest change was lowering the barrier to start.
What do you mean?
I stopped telling myself I had to finish everything immediately.
So what did you do?
I focused on showing up.
Showing up.
Yes,
Explain.
if I needed to write something, I didn't say, I need to write the whole thing.
You just started.
I said, I'm going to spend 15 minutes on it.
Did that help?
A lot.
Why?
Because 15 minutes doesn't feel threatening.
That's true.
Once I'm working, I often continue.
But even if you don't,
I still kept the promise.
that's important.
Yes,
Because you build trust with yourself.
exactly.
Small promises.
Small evidence.
Small confidence.
Over time, they add up.
You know, I think there's something else we should talk about.
What?
The fact that procrastination is sometimes connected to identity.
Identity.
Yeah,
That's an interesting word.
I mean the way we see ourselves.
Okay,
Sometimes people say things like, I'm just a procrastinator.
I've heard that a lot.
And I think that can become a problem.
Why?
Because when you describe something as part of who you are, it feels harder to change.
That's true.
If you say, I procrastinated on this project, that's a behavior.
Something you did.
But if you say, I'm a procrastinator, it becomes your identity.
And your brain starts accepting that story.
Exactly.
That's actually similar to habits.
How?
People often focus on what they want to achieve,
Like finishing a project,
or losing weight,
or learning a skill.
but they don't think about the kind of person they want to become.
So instead of saying, I want to finish my work on time,
You think, I want to become someone who respects my commitments.
that's a different mindset.
Yeah,
Because the action becomes connected to who you are.
exactly.
I like that idea.
Why?
Because sometimes goals feel temporary.
Meaning,
You finish a project,
then what?
you celebrate,
And move on.
but changing how you see yourself lasts longer.
Right.
I remember someone once told me, I'm just not an organized person.
Did they believe that?
Completely.
What happened?
They used it as an explanation for everything.
Like what?
They missed deadlines.
Okay.
They forgot appointments.
Okay.
They lost things.
Okay.
And every time they said, that's just who I am.
That's a difficult belief to change.
Yeah,
Because it removes responsibility.
but it also removes possibility.
Exactly.
If you believe something is permanent, you stop looking for solutions.
Right.
Later, that person started making small changes.
What kind of changes?
Nothing dramatic.
Good.
They put things in the same place every day.
Simple.
They wrote down important dates.
Simple.
They cleaned their workspace for 5 minutes every evening.
Simple.
And eventually, they said something interesting.
What?
They said, maybe I'm not an organized person yet, but I'm becoming one.
I like that.
Me too.
Because yet changes everything.
It leaves the door open.
I think there's another reason people procrastinate.
What's that?
They don't make decisions about what matters.
Explain.
Sometimes we procrastinate because everything feels important.
That is true.
Every email feels urgent.
Every task feels necessary.
Every request feels like a priority.
Then we get overwhelmed.
Exactly.
Because we don't know what deserves our attention.
Right.
So we spend time on small things because they're easier to complete.
Yes.
Checking 10 small tasks feels better than working on one big, difficult task.
Even if the big task matters more.
Exactly.
I think people underestimate how much saying no helps with procrastination.
Interesting.
Because every yes creates responsibility.
And 2, many responsibilities create overload.
Right.
Then everything gets delayed.
Exactly.
So sometimes procrastination isn't a discipline problem.
It's a priority problem.
That's a really important distinction. Have you ever noticed how people often delay things they actually care about?
Yes,
Like dreams.
especially dreams.
That's sad when you think about it.
It is.
People spend years saying,
One day is a dangerous phrase
why?
because it sounds like a plan.
But it's not.
Exactly.
It's a place where dreams go when we don't want to make a decision.
That's a good way to describe it.
I think people wait for the perfect conditions.
More money,
More time.
more confidence.
More knowledge.
But sometimes the conditions never become perfect.
So the dream stays a dream.
Right.
That's why I like the idea of starting before you're ready.
Even if it's messy.
Especially if it's messy.
Because the first version doesn't have to be the final version.
That's something creative people need to remember.
Yes,
A bad first draft is better than no draft.
a bad first attempt is better than no attempt.
A small step is better than a perfect plan.
Exactly.
You know what's funny?
What?
We started this episode because I almost canceled recording.
Yes,
And now we're talking about taking action.
the irony is pretty strong.
Maybe I accidentally created a good example.
You accidentally became the lesson.
I don't like that.
Why?
Because it means I can't pretend I'm just talking about other people.
That's usually the most interesting part.
Why?
Because people connect with honesty.
Not perfection.
Exactly.
I think that's why stories are powerful.
Because we see ourselves in them.
When someone says, I struggled with this too, it feels different.
Yes.
You don't feel alone.
And you don't feel broken.
You just feel human.
Exactly.
I think we should talk about one more thing.
What's that?
What actually helps people stop procrastinating?
Good question.
Because we talked a lot about why it happens.
But understanding the problem is only the first step.
Right.
The next question is, what do we do?
So what's your answer?
Honestly,
Yes.
make the first step ridiculously small.
We mentioned that before, but I think it's worth talking about more.
I agree.
Because people underestimate how powerful small actions are.
They do.
They think small actions don't matter.
They want a dramatic solution.
A complete transformation.
A new life starting tomorrow.
The new me.
Exactly.
But most changes don't happen like that.
No.
They happen quietly.
One decision at a time.
One habit at a time.
One small promise at a time.
I think people don't like that because it feels too simple.
Yes.
We want something exciting.
Something that feels like a breakthrough.
But consistency is less exciting.
And much more effective.
I remember hearing someone say,
I like that.
me too.
Because sometimes people think progress means moving quickly.
But sometimes progress means simply stopping yourself from going backward.
That's true.
For example, someone trying to exercise.
Okay.
They think,
Which sounds difficult.
so they don't start.
Right.
But maybe the first step is walking for 10 minutes.
Much easier.
Then maybe 15 minutes.
Then something more.
The important thing is creating the identity of someone who takes care of themselves.
Exactly.
Not proving something in one day.
That's the mistake many people make.
They try to prove they have changed.
Instead of actually changing.
That's a really good distinction.
Another thing that helps is removing unnecessary friction.
Friction.
Small obstacles that make things harder.
Give me an example.
If you want to exercise in the morning,
Okay.
prepare your clothes the night before.
So you don't need to think.
Exactly.
If you want to read more.
Keep a book somewhere visible.
If you want to spend less time on your phone.
Make distractions less convenient.
Like turning off notifications.
Exactly.
I think we underestimate how much our environment affects our behavior.
We do.
We always think everything depends on willpower.
But willpower changes.
Your environment is always around you.
Right.
If your phone is next to you.
You're more likely to check it.
If your healthy choices are easy.
You're more likely to make them.
That makes so much sense. Can I admit something?
Of course.
I used to think routines were boring.
Really?
Yes,
Why?
because I thought routines meant losing freedom.
And now?
Now I think routines create freedom.
Interesting.
Because when small decisions are automatic, You have more energy for important things.
Exactly.
If you spend all day deciding small things,
You have less mental energy.
like deciding what to eat,
What to wear,
when to work,
when to exercise.
a simple routine removes unnecessary choices.
Right.
Then you can focus on bigger decisions,
That's why many successful people have routines.
not because they love rules.
Because rules reduce mental effort.
That actually changes how I see routines.
I think another important thing is accepting that some days won't go well.
That's huge.
Because people often quit after one bad day.
They think they failed.
Exactly.
Someone misses one workout.
They think I ruined everything.
Someone procrastinates one afternoon.
They think I'm back to my old habits.
But one bad day doesn't define you.
Right.
The danger is turning a small mistake into an identity.
Exactly.
You don't say.
You say.
Those are completely different.
And the second one is much heavier.
So maybe improvement is also about recovery.
I think that's one of the biggest skills.
Not being perfect.
Being able to come back.
That's a very realistic goal. You know, I think we sometimes misunderstand discipline.
Hell.
We imagine discipline as being strict and never making mistakes.
But maybe discipline is just returning to what matters.
I like that.
You will get distracted.
You will have lazy days.
You will procrastinate sometimes.
You're human.
Exactly.
The question is what happens next.
Do you stay there?
Or do you come back?
That's the difference.
I actually think this applies to almost everything in life.
Not just work.
Not just work.
Relationships.
Health.
Learning.
Personal goals.
Absolutely.
Sorry.
What?
I almost said absolutely.
You caught yourself.
I'm improving.
Slowly.
Very slowly.
But you're starting.
That's true. Okay.
What?
I have an update.
About what?
The thing I mentioned at the beginning.
The dentist appointment.
Yes.
No way.
I booked it.
You actually did.
I did.
When?
Yesterday.
I'm impressed.
Thank you.
How long did you avoid it before?
3 months.
3 months.
I know.
And how long did booking it take?
5 minutes.
There it is.
I know.
The 5-minute task.
That caused 3 months of stress.
That's probably the perfect example.
Yeah.
Sometimes the thing we're avoiding isn't actually that difficult.
The difficult part is facing it.
Exactly.
And once you face it,
You realize you were carrying unnecessary weight.
that's a good feeling.
It is.
You know, I think there's something really interesting about the moment after we finally do the thing we've been avoiding.
What's that?
How often we think, why did I wait so long?
Almost every time.
Exactly.
It's such a strange feeling.
It is.
Before we do something, it feels huge.
Almost impossible.
But after we do it,
It suddenly feels small.
right,
Like our brain was exaggerating the difficulty.
sometimes it was.
Why does that happen?
I think uncertainty makes things feel bigger.
Because we don't know what will happen.
Exactly.
Our brain fills in the empty space.
And it usually doesn't choose the most positive possibility.
No.
It creates problems.
Things that might go wrong.
Things that could be embarrassing.
Things that could be difficult.
And then we react to those imaginary situations.
Even though they haven't happened.
Right.
That's fascinating.
It really is.
We spend so much energy fighting things that exist only in our imagination.
That's true.
Meanwhile, the real situation is often much easier.
Exactly.
I wonder if people would procrastinate less if they trusted themselves more.
I think so.
Because a lot of procrastination comes from thinking, what if I can't handle it?
Yes.
But if you trust yourself, you think differently.
Hell,
You think, maybe this will be difficult, but I'll figure it out.
that's a big difference.
It's not confidence that everything will be easy.
It's confidence that you can deal with difficulty.
I like that.
A lot of people misunderstand confidence.
How?
They think confident people don't feel nervous.
But they do.
Of course.
The difference is they act even when they feel nervous.
Exactly.
Confidence comes from experience.
Yes.
Every time you do something uncomfortable,
You prove to yourself that you can survive it.
And that builds trust.
Right.
You know what I think is funny?
What?
Sometimes we spend so much time trying to avoid uncomfortable moments.
Yeah,
But many of our best memories come from uncomfortable moments.
that's true.
First day at a new job,
Moving to a new place.
meeting new people.
Trying something you've never done.
At the beginning, all of those things feel scary.
But later.
Later, you remember them as important moments.
Exactly.
So maybe discomfort isn't always something to escape.
Maybe sometimes it's a sign that you're growing.
That's a really different way to see it.
It changes the question.
Instead of asking,
You ask.
that's powerful.
I think this is especially important for younger people.
Why?
Because they often feel like they need to have everything figured out quickly.
That's true.
They think everyone else knows what they're doing.
But most people are still figuring things out,
Exactly.
including adults.
Especially adults.
That's actually comforting.
It should be.
Because sometimes we think growing up means becoming someone who never doubts themselves.
But that's not true.
It means learning how to move forward while doubt exists.
Exactly.
That's a much more realistic picture. I want to ask you something.
Go ahead.
If you could go back and talk to your younger self about procrastination, what would you say?
That's a good question.
Take your time.
I would probably say, stop waiting to feel ready.
Why?
Because I spent too much time thinking confidence would come first.
But it came after action.
Exactly.
What else?
I would say, don't confuse preparation with progress.
That's a good one.
Because I used to think learning more was always the answer.
But sometimes you already know enough.
You just need to start.
I think many people need to hear that.
Including me.
Including me.
What about you?
What would I tell younger Emma?
Yes.
I would say, be kinder to yourself.
Interesting.
Because I thought criticizing myself would make me better.
And
It mostly made me afraid of making mistakes.
that happens to a lot of people.
I wish I knew that making mistakes didn't mean I was failing.
It meant you were learning.
Exactly.
Anything else?
Yes.
What?
I would say, stop trying to become a completely different person.
That's a good one.
Because I always thought I needed to transform.
But
I just needed to improve small things.
little by little.
Exactly.
I think maybe that's the biggest lesson about procrastination.
What's that?
It's not really about time.
No.
It's about our relationship with ourselves.
Explain.
How we respond when things are difficult.
How we talk to ourselves.
How much we trust ourselves.
How willing we are to be imperfect.
Exactly.
That's much deeper than just making a schedule.
A schedule can help.
But it doesn't solve everything.
Right.
Because the person using the schedule matters.
Exactly.
I feel like we've talked about a lot today.
We have.
And I still feel like I procrastinate.
That's because you're human.
Thank you for making it sound less embarrassing.
It's not embarrassing.
Maybe.
Everyone has something they avoid.
What's yours right now?
Honestly,
Yes.
cleaning my garage.
You have a garage.
Yes,
And it's a mess.
a beautiful mess.
That's a very creative description.
Thank you.
How long has it been like that?
Let's not focus on the past.
Jack,
Okay,
how long?
about a year.
A year.
Maybe a little longer.
And you spent this whole episode talking about procrastination.
I know.
You are also the example.
Apparently.
Should we end the episode by promising to fix our problems?
No.
Why not?
Because then we'll create another expectation.
Good point.
Maybe we just choose one small thing.
One thing.
One thing.
Okay.
What's yours?
I'll keep my promise about the dentist.
Already done.
Then I'll choose something else.
Good.
I'll spend 15 minutes tomorrow working on something I've been avoiding.
That sounds realistic.
What's yours?
I'll clean one corner of the garage.
One corner.
One corner.
Not the whole garage.
No.
I like that.
Why?
Because it feels possible.
Exactly.
Maybe that's the secret.
What?
Don't wait until you become a completely different person.
Start with the person you are now.
And take one small step.
Then another.
And eventually,
You look back and realize you've changed.
Not because of one huge decision.
but because of many small ones.
I think that's a good place to stop.
I agree.
Look at you.
What?
You didn't say exactly.
I'm improving.
Slowly.
Very slowly.
But you're starting.
Fair enough.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
And if there's something you've been putting off,
Maybe don't wait for the perfect moment.
just start small.
Even 5 minutes counts.
See you next time.
Bye.